Hey, I just found out that the tapes on full disclosure of Ester Saint have been released, and so I am free to talk about her. And I decided to do that in case anybody were to be misled onto exactly who Ester Saint is. Her father was a soldier in the United States military, Secret Service, Special Service actually, and he was stationed over in China. And he met a wonderful lady, beautiful lady, from Iceland. And against all rules and protocols, they became with child. And he kept it secret. Well, in her 9th month, his wife, and they had been married discreetly, was assassinated by a sniper. She had come to China to preach Christianity. Someone didn't like it, and from a distance, they put a bullet in her head. Fortunately, Ester Saint's father was there, and he had the ability and the smarts to cut Esther out of the womb and to deliver her. So Ester Saint was actually born after her mother died, which sounds crazy. Doesn't happen too often. And so Esther came to this country under very sad conditions too. Raised by her father in China after up to the age of 18. Her father too had been killed by a sniper. And Esther had always been told, should anything happen to her father, that her aunt in Chicago would more than welcome her, and they'd probably become excellent best friends. And so after taking care of different affairs in China, Esther got on a plane and flew to Chicago. She knew her aunt worked in a nursing home. She was a nurse there, and showed up and had just missed her. She didn't tell her aunt she was coming because she knew she'd have to disclose to her aunt in person that her brother was no longer alive. And so her aunt had just taken off for lunch, and Esther was waiting in the lobby for her aunt to return. And oddly enough, a German went bizarre and is standing at the lobby desk. He pulled a gun out and he started ranting in German, and people really disappeared quickly. And she knew German. Esther, being raised by her father in the military, had been around people that spoke a lot of different languages, and one of them was German. She actually was very good at learning languages and was efficient in 5 languages, I believe. And so Esther stood up. Everybody had disappeared. The German was ranting and seemed very despondent. She took off her jacket and laid it on her suitcase and walked towards the German, speaking and smiling softly. Esther had a beautiful smile, very friendly. Esther had fair skin, beautiful blue eyes, blonde hair, and was rather tall for a woman. She was about 5'8". And as she approached, she smiled, and in German she expressed the thought that she too had lost someone. You see, the German had lost his wife the day before. She had died from cancer in the nursing home, and he didn't want to go on, and he wanted to join his wife. So Esther approached him and, speaking in German and softly comforting him, trying to comfort him, got close enough to where when he finally decided to put the gun to his head and pull the trigger, she was able to grab the hammer of the gun with her left hand, stopping the hammer from landing on the firing pin, and the German had actually closed his eyes in anticipation of dying and perhaps meeting his wife again. Esther quickly moved behind the German, went to one knee, and pulled him back softly and under control to where she had full control of him, and she spoke to him and again repeated her story that she too had lost someone that she loved, but that the loved ones wanted them to live out their lives to the fullest, and only to join them when the time was right. And the German slowly relinquished the gun. Esther managed to make it disappear on her person. Esther was very good at concealing weapons. And he started to cry, and so she comforted him as a mother would a child. And at that moment, the police arrived, and they grabbed him. They questioned everybody for a while, and Esther told him that he had been waving a Bible, and it was sad that his wife had passed away. And so nobody was certain if it was a Bible or a gun, but Esther had the Bible, and she was actually showing it to the police. So they took him off for psychiatric observation in a hospital for the next 3 days, and would probably charge him with disorderly conduct. So at that point, the police were gone, and a nurse, one of Esther's aunt's co-workers, approached her and said, "My gosh, you really handled that well, and weren't you concerned and afraid?" And Esther explained, I speak German, and I knew he was no threat to anybody but himself, and that he was sad because he had lost his wife. And so Mary, the co-worker of Esther's aunt, said, well, can I help you? And Esther explained that she was there in hopes of becoming close to her aunt, who she never met before. And Mary asked, "Well, who is your aunt?" And she told her it was Ester Saint. And Mary said, "Oh yes, Brandy. She leaves every day for about an hour lunch, but she should be returning pretty soon. Perhaps we can go into the workers' lobby or lunchroom and wait for her. And so they did. And Mary was a curious person, as many of us are. But she didn't want to drill Esther with questions. And so as they went into the employees' break room, Esther and Mary became more familiar with each other, and Esther explained that her father had just passed away, and that she had hopes of perhaps living with her aunt, and that she knew they would get along because if she was anything like her dad, just a little bit, they'd be best friends. And so they continued the discussion and waited for Ester Saint to return from lunch. And that was about it. Everything went well. Aunt Brandy did finally show up. And when she entered the room and saw Esther stood up, and they stood gazing at each other, and Brandy understood that with Esther being there, her brother was probably no longer alive. And she knew that this was her niece. Her brother had described his daughter very clearly in letters to his sister. And so Brandy said, "You know, my brother had told me someday I'd meet a beautiful young woman, and she would probably be the best of friends with me and change my life." The two of them walked towards each other, hugged, and at that moment, they both felt the bond of family. Mary was feeling a little awkward in the situation, and so she spoke up and said, "Why don't you two leave? And Brandy, I can," she offered to finish the day for Brandy and cover her patients. She said that'll be no problem. She'd clear it with their boss. And so Brandy came over to Mary and gave her a big hug and smiled at her and said, "Thank you so much, Mary, for this. I really appreciate it." And Mary was somewhat shocked because while they were friends, they really weren't real close friends. They were co-workers. But at that moment, it seemed like Brandy had become perhaps a different person. Mary was amazed. More mature in a way, she thought. And so she said to Brandy, "I'm more than willing to do this, and so you two go. It's Friday, you have the weekend ahead of you." So Brandy and Esther, they left and went out to the parking lot. Brandy started making excuses about her car. She said, "It's not a new car, but I love it. My brother gave it to me when he left for the military. And I just wouldn't trade it for nothing. It's a old car, but it's always ran for me really well." And so as they approached it, Esther could tell it needed some work. The front windshield had a crack in it. There were some dents in it. Brandy quickly said, "Oh, and by the way, the passenger door doesn't open real easily. You're going to have to tug on it because the wind caught it a couple years ago." And so they chuckled. They both got in the car, and Esther's stomach growled, and she turned to her and said, "Would you mind finding a place for me to have some lunch because I haven't eaten for a while?" And Brandy said, "Well, what would you like?" Esther said, "Well, do we have a Chinese restaurant close by that would be really good?" Brandy said, "I know the best Chinese restaurant in Chicago. Leave it to me, and we'll be there in no time at all." So that was the beginning of Esther's life in Chicago. And it was quite wonderful from that point on.